Hello, world. Welcome to another Devology live cast with myself, Tim Ruswick, Rick Davidson. We got a special guest today, Vimlark. Uh, and if you don't know, Vimlark runs a wonderful, awesome YouTube channel about game development. And today we're going to talk about a little bit about his channel, about all that stuff, but also we're going to talk about game jam stuff. I'm excited. I love game jams. Vimlark, how you doing, dude?
Doing well. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm always excited one to have guests on here, but also specifically to I'm gonna pull chat up if or those are comments. Never mind. Specifically to talk about subjects that I'm passionate about, and game jams happen to be one of those things because like I think game jams are this beautiful kind of mix between it's almost like forced creativity in a way, like constrained creativity, right? The problem with general game development sometimes is you have infinite ideas and infinite scope, but game jams are like, no, what if you took that and put it in a little box and then also kicked it out the door by next Monday? um and some crazy stuff happens, right?
I,
And it's
I've
exciting.
I've got a starting question, Tim, because the context, a lot of people who are going to be watching this are people who they haven't been in a game jam before. It'll be their first game jam. They're a little bit intimidated by it. They're not sure what to expect. And what we preach is even if you just have, a little character that jumps, there we go. You made a game, enter it in the game jam, submit it. That's the starting point. You've got to do something basic before you can grow into something, bigger and crazier. So Vimlark, who now I know your real name is Nick, but I shall continue to call you Vimlark, just for consistency's sake. What would you recommend in your years of wisdom and experience seeing and participating in game jams? Where should someone start if they've never been in a game jam before and they're a little bit intimidated by it? What words of wisdom would you have for those folks?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there. But first off, I think the thing is a lot of people get really hung up on the time, and people get really like worried about like, oh God, I'm not gonna be able to make something in that amount of time or this or that. Really, more game jams should be more thought of as like an exercise. I don't know. I kind of like them as that way, where it's more like I'm here to test out how well I know how to do something or make something that's interesting or fun. But I think too many people think of making a game. And yes, you're making a game, but think of it more like making a demo. I think too many people approach it like you don't want
Yeah.
to make a game with 30 levels. That's too long. Because the other thing you got to remember when you're making a jam game, is the output. The output is a lot of people are going to come and play games at the end, leave feedback. That's the thing that I think is the best part about a game jam is everybody, you get the design challenge and it kind of flexes your design skills. I went to art school, so to me, this kind of feels like homework assignments in a way where it's like, you have to do this. Cool. You make your thing and then you post it. Then everybody gets to go play and see how everyone else interpreted the same prompt and then give feedback. And that's kind
Right.
of the most important part. I think a lot of people want to make a great game jam game, do well, and, win or this or that. But really, the big part is you get better from doing game jam games. One, because you get feedback from people on the thing you made, not to mention the fact that you get to go and play and see how other people interpreted the same idea, stuff you would have never thought of. I mean, at this point, I've played hundreds of game jam games, like hundreds, literally. And people always ask, like, where do you come up with ideas? I'm like, I don't need to come up with ideas anymore. I find all of them and then I mash stuff together that I thought were cool, right? Like it really opens up your horizons and broadens your scope. But when you're getting into it, I think the main thing to think about is just try and have fun with it. And the biggest thing is your scope. Scope is the number one problem that kills everybody in a game jam. I suggest planning for half the time. If you have like a 48-hour game jam, try to think of something and scope for something you can make in 24 hours. Because if you succeed, right, which is very rare and probably not going to happen, you succeed in making it in 24 hours, cool. You've now got another 24 hours to add more cool stuff,
Yeah.
more polish, more juice, and the biggest one that most people never think about in game jams, playtesting. Have someone playtest beforehand. The number of times I've seen someone, or heard someone say, go right up to the end, or tried to play a game where they got right up to the end, they submitted in the last seconds of the deadline, and there's a bug in the game and it can't be played now. So you just wasted, you just spent all that time for a game that can no longer be played. And it's disheartening.
Yeah.
It's really sad. So I suggest try to shoot for something that will take you half of the time. And that helps take into account all of the inevitable things that come up, real life, flaky teammates, this or that, like bugs, things that you don't expect to spend a couple hours or who knows how long working on. That's the biggest one. I think most people get intimidated because they sit down, they try to plan a game for the amount of time they have, and then get completely stressed out when they realize I can't actually make this in that time because everything else took longer than I was expecting.
Especially beginners, because I think beginners have they can't quite accurately project how much time something's going to take. So they're basing their how much time they think it's going to take on just some random, like, oh, I think it'll take 2 days, but they have no idea because they've never done it before. So then you add that to like this strict timeline, things don't get finished. The other part that you brought up in there too that I want to highlight is like treating it like a demo. I think that's important from like a gameplay time perspective, but also from like a publishing standpoint. Like I think there's a lot of people, like we forget because we've made so many game jam games that it's just like whatever. I don't care what I make. I don't care if it's good or bad. Like I want it to be good, but sometimes I just make bad stuff and it's cool. But some people, like, it's their first game jam and they're like, oh, well, I want the first thing I put out to be like good. So like I'm worried about people judging me for my thing because what if it's bad? And I think that's super important to like take that pressure off of it, because if you're really worried about that kind of crazy pressure of like, oh, what if this thing is bad? Like it can be crippling and you can end up not publishing, right? Or you can obsess over stuff that's not as important as you think it is.
Oh, yeah. So, the one thing that I actually suggest to people is you don't have to join a game jam to participate, because the join button, you don't have to press until you submit. So what I've told a lot of people to do is if you're, thinking about it, but you don't want to like commit, just start with it, start at the time. Just don't click that join button. And if you can't make it or can't finish it, you've learned something. You've understood like you overscoped or this or that happened. Yeah. But you're not out anything. You haven't even made a full commitment. So if you're really timid about it, that's one thing that you can do is just do it alongside to just get the feel and the flow and see how that goes for you. I mean, I generally don't join a game jam until I'm submitting the game.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's cool if you have commitment issues or something, you're not sure you want to do it. But
as someone who runs a game jam, it's kind of annoying when people do that. Like I will say, like it's really funny when you run a game jam, you don't really know how many people are in it until like right up till the end. Like you'll watch that number skyrocket. But from a commitment standpoint, I mean, we all have lives, right? Like game jams are hobbies. They are stuff to be done as fun. And nowadays game jams have become even more of a hobby. Whereas, the traditional start for a game jam, at least that most of us know, is it was kind of to figure out what your next game is going to be, right? You prototype some things and you figure out what the next long running project is. Well, now there's a whole bunch of people like me that, we've got work, we've got lives, we've got other stuff. And instead of spending the next 2 years on the same project, I enjoy making a new one once a month and see what kind of thing I can make, just play around and put something out.
Yeah. I think as well for your first couple of game jams, I think you shouldn't do anything in your game that you haven't done before. So you should have zero innovation, zero nifty things, zero exploration. If it's your first or second or maybe even third game jam, you get there and say, okay, I've done some tutorials, I've worked through some YouTube videos, I've practiced this, I made a platformer using Unity and using a tile-based 2D platformer. I know how to do that. I've done it already. I'm going to do one of those and I'll make it a little bit faster and you can jump a bit higher this time. And so, already having some code in there, obviously starting the project from zero, but looking at what you've done before and, I know how to do that. I know how to do this. And I'm going to make it a little bit better, a little bit cleaner or a little bit more fun to play. I would say that's the way to do it rather than sitting there. And I've seen this in game jams, people sitting there for hours and hours and teams debating, let's have it that when you get to the end, everything explodes. No, let's have it that it's a puzzle. Or no, let's have it that it's multiplayer. Oh my God, multiplayer. Don't do multiplayer. So I think people take so much time thinking about something cool that they don't just get in there and make a thing. And the whole point is make a thing, finish a thing. So if it's your first game jam, do something that you've already done, would be my advice.
I jump in on that and say, always do that. Cause I consider game jams a lot more of the time about testing what you know. Like these are things that I have learned, I have tested. I'd say a majority of the Game Jam games that I make, I've made some iteration of that mechanic in some way before. I weirdly like to do fast challenges, so I'll do like I used to do on my streams. We would do like a 3-hour challenge. I'd basically just make something in 3 hours, right?
Mm.
It doesn't look good, it's not great, but all this, it's a fun exercise. And I'd say a majority of the jams I do nowadays are going back to those mechanics and then refining them even further. So
Right.
I've kind of gotten the core of like, okay, I can kind of see how this interacts. Now I'm going to play with that and take it a little bit further and use a game jam for that.
Yeah, and we have a lot of people in the GameDev.tv community that like have taken a course and maybe they've made 2 or 3 games over the course of the course. You see what I did there? But so they've have like a little bit of experience in certain genres or certain mechanics, but they don't have a ton of breadth to their experience, right? Like they don't haven't tried 10 million things. So I definitely think in that case it makes a lot of sense to kind of stick to stuff but also on the professional end, right? Like once you've done stuff over and over and over, like creatively, a lot of times people like to jump genres or jump mechanics and stuff because it can be more stimulating. But if you want to think about purely making a good product, you make a better product by having done the thing 10 times already, right? Like you remember, oh, that time I made that platformer, got to add that coyote jump, you got to add the all the different things that you learn over the iteration of working with that genre, and it just makes it so much better. Every game that I've ever made that has been a mechanic I've already programmed before is just so much smoother and cleaner.
So much better. There's an
And you get-
interesting sorry, I was just going to say there's an interesting question in the chat, and so I want to broaden that into a bigger question for you, Vimlark. The question is about: is it okay to use a project that you've already started working on when it comes to the game jam, and maybe bring in code that you've already been creating? What for you are the kind of ethical rules of game jams that people the unwritten or unspoken, or maybe they're written and spoken rules about, well, it's okay to do this, but make sure you don't do that when it comes to what you can or should or shouldn't do for game jams?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they are written rules. Like read the rules of the jam you're participating in, because the big thing is there's no one game jam, right? Like some jams have themes, some don't. Some jams give you the theme ahead of time, some have others restrictions. I mean, heck, there's a black and white jam out there where you only get 2 colors in your game. That's one of the restrictions it places on you. So make sure you're looking at the jam page, read what they have. Most of the time there is information about like pre-made assets. Generally, when it comes to code, what I find most people agree on is general use code. If it's code that you've written in something else that you can drop into anything, like, screen transition or camera movement, right? That can kind of be dropped into almost any game. But, maybe specific, these specific interactions, a lot of times people try and avoid that. But if you're using libraries of other things, I mean, it's the same as going into Unity and picking, or at least I'm not sure about Unity. I'm not a Unity user, but going in and basically picking any of the default behaviors built into your engine, right? It's kind of the similar thing of pulling in code that you've used somewhere else. So I think what I suggest is don't bring in like a whole game. Don't pre-make a game or anything like that. But, if you're bringing in pieces like, oh, I've made a character movement system before. Okay, cool. I'll bring that kind of code in and I can just kind of tweak it for what I need here. Generally, though, I would say, like, if you've already got, like, I try to start from a fresh project each time. I feel like it also builds better. Let's see, what's the right word? It builds just better muscle memory, I guess, heuristics in your own, like just when you're when you're making things, a lot of learning code is repetition. A lot of learning how to make things is doing it over and over again. So if you're constantly just copying and pasting and stuff in, and then something breaks, well, it's like, oh wait, which piece did I copy in that's not working together with this thing this time now? So I do find, for the things that are more common that you do a lot, it's actually almost better to kind of redo them a bunch of times because you get faster at doing them and you better understand fully how they work.
Yeah, and their limitations and the scope of their use and all that stuff. There's some things like I've got this screen shake thing I did in Construct like 2 years ago that basically it's like a custom sign mathematical thing that like tilts the screen. I have no idea how it works. I have no idea how I got it to work. It's got a bunch of math equations that I copied from Stack Overflow. I've used that in multiple projects because I'm like, that is something that's way over my head that I don't want to touch ever again. But I'm with you. Most of the stuff I end up remaking if I can. Now there's some stuff in like Unity. I know if you've got like a character controller that you perfected in third person, you don't have to sit there and reinvent the wheel over and over again, right? Like you don't have to. You don't want the game jam to be all recreating code that you already have. If you just want to make like an adventure game, right? You can drop that stuff in.
It
But
can
I
get a
also,
little bit. Oh, sorry, Tim.
I
I
was
think
just
we've
gonna
got a
say,
delay today. I keep jumping over the top of you.
the
That's what
only
she said.
thing that I think is, I think one of the reasons why game jams don't necessarily work with like grand prizes and stuff like that is because once you put it into a competition, then all that stuff starts to be questioned, right? Like how much assets did you use? What engine? Like it gets really weird. Whereas like when it's just like, oh, let's all do this together, then it's like we don't really care if you use that asset thing that you had. You know, it's like a more just friendly atmosphere.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just gets into what you want to get out of the jam, right? Like, I mean, I've seen people using, Unreal Engine starter templates. That's got a lot of code already pre-written in those, right? And is that fair to use? I guess it depends on each person. I kind of agree with you on, I'm personally not a fan of prizes for game jams.
It doesn't work. I haven't seen it work.
Yeah, game jams, I mean, game jams in essence are more about just participating and enjoying and having fun. When you throw on those extra kind of like incentives, well, that's now you have an incentive to bend or break rules and not play within the spirit, right?
Yeah, it just skews everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'll still participate in them if I want, if they sound fun, but it's one of those ones where generally like it's like a game jam with a big prize pool is not something I'm like super eager to jump into a lot of the time.
It's when we were talking about the GameDev.tv game jam, we were talking about prizes and stuff, and ultimately what we settled on is we're going to give a free course to everyone that submits a game, because it's like that's the spirit of the game jam, right? Of like submitting and finishing, not so much getting first place or top tier or whatever.
Yeah, and like in that position, I love that concept where it's like, no, you just like participating is the prize, like right? As long as you've participated, you're going to get something cool out of it.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen anything work well when it comes to finding teammates? Because we get this question all the time. Oh, I want to do a game jam. I'd like to team up with someone. How do I find people? And what do I say? Not just the generic, look in these places and say good stuff. Have you seen anything that works particularly well for finding teammates? Different question is, how do you work with the teammates once you found them? But just actually connecting and saying, okay, let's join and be part of a team.
I'm going to be bad on this one because I normally do everything solo. I'm one of those crazy people that like the fun of a game jam to me is to challenge myself to see how much I can create. Like the only pre-made stuff that I use is like audio things, because that's just not something that I do. But I'd say I've only ever partnered up with people a couple of times, and they've all either been people I knew or, like my daughter. But what I have seen for people that do like team up, a lot of the times, a lot of jams will have a Discord or something that goes along with it and a team up section where people can say like, hey, I do this or I make this. But I tend to find the ones that seem to do successful are people that are just part of the same community beforehand and know what each other does. I'm always a bit hesitant to team up with somebody unknown, just because, again, when you're dealing under pressure, under time frame, I don't know and it's not to like, be rude about anybody, but it's like, I don't know if you're going to deliver on time. I don't know what your kind of work ethic is. Like, I don't know how well we're going to even work together. So I would almost say if you want to do jams with people, kind of start that process early. Make sure you get into a community, start, talking with other people, see the things that they're making, and kind of develop that like rapport first, and then kind of go in with it. That's what I've seen be the most successful. And it's worked with like when because I run a yearly game jam as well. I've seen some teams that are just like, oh, these are all people I know from my community. Like they're all part of my community. And I see them talking together in chat, or I see them talking together on Discord. And those are generally the teams that are the strongest, I find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having a bit of a history with someone already, even just, in our chat, whenever we do these live casts, there's always, similar people in there chatting. If you see someone you've seen week in, week out, then you can start a conversation with them. Oh, let's team up together.
I think people you like too, and people that you have fun with, I think are more important than people that are like really good at what they do. Because so many times Like I've met some people that are really good at what they do, but they are very hard to work with, right? And that takes all the fun out of it for me. Whereas like if you could just have fun, and even if it's not the best thing, but they're collaborative and they know how to compromise on ideas, right? Like basic soft skill stuff. Make sure they have that stuff where they can, just if they think it's a bad idea, we understand it's a bad idea, but you don't need to like quit the project because you're upset about it, kind of deal. Yeah, and the problem is people that join teams last minute, like you have no idea who you're teaming up with, right? And learning that person while you're doing the game jam is very stressful, especially if you're a little more introverty, because it's complicated to navigate the social pressures of that.
I honestly think that's why I do game jam solo. The first game jam I ever went to was put on by some friends of mine. It was a 12-hour game jam, and we got there and I kind of split up. And since I was like, well, I'm not using an engine that most people know, I'll just be an artist today. And then the team split up all weird, and then it ended up with, there was 2 artists left over. I was like, well, I can make something in contract. Sure, I'll be the programmer for this. And I ended up having 2 artists that were supposed to work with me all day. I think I got a character and the enemies made in terms of like some pixel art sprites. I still had to make the entire background. Like it's just the hard part is when you start working in a team, you need someone that can take that project manager role to keep other people accountable. And if your job is one of the ones where, like, say you're the programmer and you're just head down trying to make sure the whole thing works, you don't have time to be on top of other people to make sure they're getting their work done too. I've actually seen success of people doing game jams where one person mainly focuses on being like the project manager and coordinating.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, like almost because the cool thing about game jams is they bring in multiple disciplines. I've seen projects that have actually, like game jams that have worked well, bringing in a project manager, and you'd be amazed how much smoother everything runs when people are organized, especially when you're dealing with game jams where people have to, again, doing solo stuff, but like, people all have to commit their code together and then make sure it all works when it's running, together. And that becomes even more of a hassle of, oh man, once everyone pushes the thing, does the final build even work? And having somebody that actually kind of handles that role of making sure people submitting on time, people are keeping track on this and that.
You know what I've learned in that as well, being like many years of being a producer / project manager in the games industry, is people hate project managers, just hate them. So I've been on a game jam, it's like, okay, you guys, let's get going. Have you done the thing? It's like, just piss off, Rick. Like, we don't want to talk to you because I'm trying to work. So I think that if you can be the project manager but brand yourself as like the coordinator or the joiner or something, then people are less resentful, because I've seen the power go to the project manager. Okay, my minions, we're going to make a game and this is what it's going to be about, and have you done my thing yet? And that project manager, people start to resent, how come you're in charge of this? And they start to become the lead designer and the lead programmer and the art director. So I think if you are going to, I love what you're saying about having someone coordinate. Just make sure you set your roles and responsibilities really clearly. So you'll code this feature, you'll make art for that. Whoever's being that coordinator is the kind of play tester and joiner together. I think that's a lot healthier than having them have some sort of title that, they get all like,
I've been to one in-person game jam. Every other game jam I've done has been digital, but the one we had a dude join our team that it was at like a college, a game dev college or something like that. I didn't go to college, but I was like, hey, I want to go to game jam, so I'm here. But he was a producer, but he didn't mention himself as a producer. He said he's kind of all hands. He kind of has a little bit of skill set. But then I found out all of his experience was in producer, and that's exactly what he did. He was like, hey, do you need help with this? Hey, let's get this out. If we do this first, then we can make that happen. And then we needed art at one point, so he just randomly started like Googling stuff and changing it and tracing over it. He brought us like drinks and stuff while we were like programming.
Wow.
I would totally have another producer on my team. And that was it. And if someone had said, I want to be a producer on your game jam team, I would have been like, we don't need you, dude. It's all good. But like having that experience, I was like, wow, this was like super helpful.
Yeah. And I think some of it goes back, like with Rick, what you were saying is basically this just all comes down to interpersonal skills, really. Like, if somebody comes in halfway through the project and starts taking over, that's where you get that resentment. But if at the start, it's like, okay, they are in charge of making sure that we get these things done on time. When they come and ask you, make sure you have an answer. There's a big difference when the roles and, responsibilities are kind of decided and agreed upon ahead of time. I think that's a big one. Also, if you have general people that can't work with each other, you're going to have problems no matter what. It's not going to matter whether you have someone, coordinating or not.
That trust is important, right? Because like if you believe the other person has the best interest of the team in mind and they're being helpful, then it's like, oh yeah, when they're asking for that thing, it doesn't feel like an attack. But if they're like have on their high horse, like they feel like, oh well, where is the thing? Or it's not matching with the team culture, it can clash. And the problem is a lot of times if you join a team like that and you don't know who you're joining with, like you don't know if their personality is going to mesh with yours well or not.
I think there's also a lot to be said on a team of how you decide who decides. And so if it's like, I'm the art guy, it's like, cool, you do the art. And if you want to do, big heads on the characters or, have them run really fast, whatever, that's you. You're the art person. And the programmer is obviously doing the programming. But I think when it comes to, okay, well, I think we should make this game more like a puzzle as opposed to a fast Twitch game. Someone else says, no, let's make a real fast action game. That's where I think if you go into it with a couple of people that you might not know super well, 3 people on a team, let's make a game, and you suddenly have this conversation where I prefer, fast and you prefer slow. That's where I think you can waste a lot of time if people have a different idea in their head. So, again, don't want to talk too much about teams, particularly if you guys, have worked solo more. But I think having a really frank conversation with your teammates at the start, like 5 minutes, okay, we're going to disagree. What do we do? Is one person going to be the ultimate decision maker?
Right.
Like the game designer? Are we going to have one of those and everyone else just gives our ideas and we're beholden to whatever that person thinks? Or are we going to do a vote or are we going to do a committee? So just to have a system and then stick with that system.
Alternatively, knowing people going in and knowing that they're good at compromise. So like I designed a card game with my fiance Alyssa, and one of the things that was super super important to that is like there were times where we definitely disagreed on mechanics, but there were several times where I'm like, okay, if you give me that, I'll give you this. Like the hand limit, for some reason she did not want a 5-card hand limit, she wanted unlimited hands, but I was like, we need that because this is important to this game, because we got to make sure people don't hoard cards. And I forget what I ended up giving her in the design. But yeah, having someone that can like trade stuff, right? Versus just like dig their heels in the sand on that idea for no reason. When it's like, we're going to make a thing, it's going to be different than, like, there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad, right? It's not like if you do it that way, it's going to be bad. It's just going to be different.
Another thing. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, so like another thing you can think of too is if you do kind of find a couple of people, you're like, okay, I would like to do jams with these people from a community. When I went to art school and I had friends that worked in film, and they would all take turns being director and working on each other's films. So you can almost treat it like, I'm the designer for this jam. Cool. Yeah. We'll design your game for that jam. So you can actually kind of, everybody gets experience in all of the different like roles and possibilities that are out there. So that way, again, in a jam, you don't have a lot of time. So if you have a group that can't communicate or have someone that's like making a final decision, it can be very hard to get stuff done. You run into a lot of issues. So possibly another thing is, find people you like and trade position. Honestly, like have someone, you're the lead designer this time. I mean, we can give input, but you get the final say. Next time I get the final say.
Yeah. What about at the other end of the spectrum? If you're working solo, which I think most folks, in game jams tend to work solo, or in our community, I think that's going to be the case. And how to feel more connected to the community, how to feel like, yes, I'm working on my game by myself, but look at all of us together doing this thing. Because we're not all meeting up in a huge, I've gone to a game jam where everyone's in a huge room at a university and, there's hundreds of people and wow, look at all this excitement. So do you guys have any thoughts on that? How you can feel connected, how you can be chatting with other people, even if you're not working on a game together with them?
I mean, Discord in general is just being part of game dev communities at this point. If there's any creator you like or any other, there's so many Discord communities out there. I've honestly lost track of the amount of Discords I'm on at this point, but most jams do have a Discord where people are posting the things they share. Twitter's always a great one too, although it's getting harder and harder to go to that site nowadays. I don't want to look at it anymore.
Politics.
Yeah, but streaming is also a really good one, especially if the jam is larger. If you stream yourself, or if you just are on while you're working on it, that's also a great place. Or if it's a bigger jam, right? If it's one of like the Ludum Dares, it's like the Game Maker's Toolkit, it's any of these kind of like big ones, the Bracky's Game Jam. There's usually people streaming it, so even if you're not directly involved, you can have that up and feel like you're working alongside somebody doing something as well. Chat every now and then.
Oh yeah.
I definitely just find.
Oh,
go ahead.
Just to clarify on that, so say you're streaming in the game jam. You and I are both in a game jam. You're streaming. I'm working on my game, and I've got you just streaming in the background. So I'm like, yeah, he's doing that, and I'm doing my stuff, and maybe you can chat every now and again. So that's how I can feel connected to you. Maybe I've got a couple of streamers going. Oh, okay, cool. And being part of the same game jam, that makes sense.
I do that in just general. Like, I have plenty of other streams and friends that I watch that, while I'm working on my thing, I kind of pop them up, and it's like co-working without co-working. Because the one thing when you're programming and stuff, like, you got to kind of focus in, and you can't really have a ton of distractions all the time. So it's really nice to have that up. It's like, oh, I got to focus in. I'll mute for 10 minutes. I'll dig into this, and that kind of thing I found to be really helpful, is just having other people kind of working on similar projects that just help you feel more connected, especially in this, more online world nowadays. We're kind of all just doing our own thing. So between Discord and Twitch have kind of been my big, or YouTube too. I mean, if you stream on YouTube, sorry, I stream on Twitch, so my brain defaults to that.
Yep.
I think from the other end too, actually streaming yourself. I know this isn't for everybody. I know you're gonna have a tech setup to do it and all that, but like I really felt a sense of connectedness being able to share my project live and work on it, and have a bunch of people come in and chat with me. Especially like during game jams is a really good time to get people into it, because everybody's interested in the thing. They're all doing the thing there. If you're just starting out streaming, like, nobody's going to come to your stream. That's just the reality of nobody. Like, it's just impossible to get anybody to your stream at first. But specifically during game jams with a community doing it, a lot of people are available to watch, and they'll be interested in your stuff, and they'll help you out for things like that. So it could be a good time to try that out. But
a lot of Discords have streaming like channels too, where you could, instead of streaming to the whole internet, you can just stream to that Discord as well, to be like, hey, if anybody wants to just work alongside or this or that. The one thing I will say, be warned, if you do kind of stream or like get into sharing your project while you're working on it, that's how scope creep happens really, really fast, because everybody goes, oh, this would be cool. Ooh, and you go, that would be cool. And oh, that would be cool too. I will never finish this now. Right. Like that can happen really fast. So the one thing, if you do start trying to like stream and kind of like share your progress as you're going, make sure you keep your scope in mind, because it's really easy to get excited when somebody throws out an idea you didn't think of and want to try and add that. And that can compound real fast.
Streaming my project Cypherpunk, I think, was this thing that single-handedly derailed that entire project. Because I was it scoped beyond what I was capable of, and I was just like, I have to quit this. I'm sorry. It's just because now I can't make a smaller version of it, because I see that super awesome version in my head. I've seen questions a few times pop up about mistakes. Do you think there are any mistakes beyond like the don't scope your game too big or stuff like that you see pretty common in game jams?
I think the big one is trying to make a complicated game in a space where you don't have the ability to teach players complicated like thoughts and processes, right? You think of a lot of, like, when most of us think of the games we like, there's mechanic upon mechanic upon mechanic that really, like, as the new mechanic comes in, it's like, oh, it gets even cooler and cooler, and it's really fun to think about those kind of processes. But in a game jam, generally you need to think of game jams more like arcade games, in my opinion. So like I said before, like a demo or an arcade game where you jump people in and they've just got to be able to play.
Right.
Most people aren't going to have time for a tutorial, because you don't have time to make a tutorial 99 times out of 100 in a game jam. Your tutorial is some text on the screen, right, of how to play. And if that's 3 paragraphs, because I've seen ones that are more, like, it's like, I'm not going to remember any of this. And then I get into the game like, oh, you're supposed to do this. It's like, I totally forgot that was even a mechanic in this game, because there was just too many to go in. So trying to put in too many mechanics and make your game too complex, I feel like, is one of the big issues that I see a lot of, where the game is actually really fun, but the onboarding of getting the player in and actually learning how to play it so they can actually experience the fun aspects fall short a lot of the time. And that's a big one I see again, of just that it falls in with overscoping. I mean, I would honestly say I can probably relate almost everything back to overscoping as the number one problem in game jams. But yeah, in general, that's the biggest one, is just not planning for your output, really, right? Like you need to make a game for the players that are playing. You want to make kind of a short, fast, fun experience, and the more things you try to put in, and usually it's because it's like, oh, this is cool, this seems clever, this is nice. They tend to muddy up that core mechanic that the player never really gets to experience that you started off with.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because the other part of it too is I've seen people that try to make games that are too long, or try to make games that are 30 minutes or an hour. A lot of people go into game jams wanting like a fun 5 or 10 minute experience. And the problem with adding too much content is, one, most people aren't going to see it. But two, because you spent all the time on that content, you're really kind of leaving a lot on the table for that first 30 seconds or first 2 minutes. And if you don't have a tutorial, or you don't have the controls clearly laid out, or you haven't polished, like I've seen games before that use like 8 keys for different stuff. And it's like, I understand why you might have done that. But as someone that doesn't have any on-screen visuals to remind me of those controls, and trying to play this thing, it gets very, very complicated. So keeping all that and stuff in mind, just constantly think in your head, someone's going to play this for the first time. How do I give them 5 minutes of fun? Right? Like that's kind of a good scope to stick to, I think.
Yeah, and the way I like to put it too, I literally just recorded. I'm giving a talk on this at the end of the month too, like on like tips to do better at game jams and all that as well. But the way I like to equate it is, you need to design for your output, right? If you need to design a city driving sedan car, it's got to get good gas mileage, be able to stop and go, have good turning radius, be comfortable. You're not going to design a Formula One race car. Right. And if you're trying to design a couple hour-long game experience and pack all this stuff into a game jam game, like, you're designing for the wrong thing. For a game jam, when people sit down to play game jams, they want to play a bunch of games. They want to sit down, play a bunch, and rate a bunch, because that means more people will come rate theirs. 10 minutes is my sweet spot that I tell people to go for, because if I can sit down, see what your concepts were, what your ideas were in 10 minutes, I'm going to leave super happy, go play the next game, and move on with that. If I'm there 30 minutes later, just like, still going, instead of 30 levels, have 10. Have 10 refined levels instead of 30 with a bunch of repetitive stuff in them that get kind of dull and boring over time. Really hone in. And that's why I say, like, cut it down as much as possible and make a small experience that people can get through. If someone says, oh, I wish there was more at the end, that's the best thing you can hear. No one wants to hear, I wish it was half the length.
There's a concept I think it's in filmmaking, that I learned from an old business partner of mine, that said it's better to like cut a scene a half second too short and leave them wanting more, than to have it a half second too late and like make them slightly bored for a second. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, their experiences are so long that and not even so long, just it could be 20, 30 minutes, but it was only fun for 10, and they took a little too long, and it kind of drained the experience a little bit.
I think as creators, there's a little bit of a curse of time imbalance. What I mean by that is, this is terrible for games. I've spent, for a game jam, I've spent, for example, a week working on this game, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. So therefore, I feel that I need to create an experience for my player that is at least an hour, because look how long I've put into this. So the conversation about, no, make your game so it's 5 minutes. Yeah, but I spent a week on this for 5 minutes. It's similar if you're out there making an indie game you're going to publish and you've worked on it for a year. You don't want to make a game that people only play for 20 minutes. It's like, this was a year of my life. It can't equate to a 20-minute experience. But I think you need to move beyond that as a developer and say, well, it's okay. I'm trying to make, as you're saying, trying to make a 10-minute amazing experience for someone. That's all I need to make. That's all they're expecting. This is a free game that they're going to come along, play for 10 minutes and say, oh, that was pretty good. Well done. And then move on to the next. So you are making it a little bit for the player to have a good experience. But the purpose of the game jam is that you get better at making games. Like, that's the whole purpose of it. You don't want to make something that's bad that people don't like, but you're not trying to make something amazing that they then say, wow, here's $50. Thanks for making that game. You're making it for you to practice game development.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, and those of us that are like older too, have this memory when games worth seemed to be valued in their playtime. Remember when, the box is
Yeah.
hundreds of hours of gameplay? It's like, yeah, but it's
Oh
so
yeah,
repetitive, like
yeah,
that. I think a lot of people have that ingrained, like, oh, a game is a couple of hours. You've got Steam's whole thing is like, oh, if it's not over 2 hours, you can return it for free, kind of a thing. So a lot of people have these time limits set in their head of how long a game should be, as opposed to like, that's also forgetting the fact that people paid for those. There's an investment made, right? Like
Mm.
people are more willing to put in a little bit more time because they've invested actual money in it. In a free product, people are going to bail faster. I work in like my day job. I'm here on my lunch break. Like my day job, I work in marketing and advertising. And if I can't catch your attention in a second, you're gone. Like that, a 1 second dwell time is a good thing in marketing and advertising, right? Like that's getting someone's attention and taking their time. So I always like to say time is the most valuable resource that anyone can give us because it's the only thing that we can't get more of. Like everyone, the time you have is the time you have. So if someone gives you their time and their attention, value it and don't waste it. The concept, like literally one of the worst things that anyone could ever say to me is, oh, it doesn't get good for 20 minutes. I'm never playing this game. Why would I bother? Like, why are you wasting or a couple hours? Like, I think there's some games where it's like, no, it's like the first couple hours or nothing. It's like, why would I play this? In my opinion, right? Like maybe you have more investment, but don't make me waste a bunch of time before I get to have fun.
Yeah. I think attention is one of those. Attention is the currency when you're making these fun game jam games, right? Like, especially if it's like you want to make it. That brings up another good point that I found too is like because you have limited time, making games playable in the browser on itch, for example. I seem to get a ton more plays when I do that. Like people just play my game way more often than download the zip file, unzip it, play it. Have to run their virus scan because there are lots of fun people in this world. So making it as accessible as possible, like having it built into the itch page with the web version, with the controls listed right below, or preferably in-game, right, with some kind of iconography. It goes a long way because people appreciate that and they play it a lot more.
It's that barrier to entry, really. Like if you,
right.
I mean, Tim, you've worked in advertising and stuff too, so like every interaction you require the user to make to get to your final product is a drop-off point. If you have a menu and you've got to click this button, then that button, then that button, you now have 3 opportunities where someone goes meh and just closes it, right? So getting the players in as quickly as possible. I've actually found success with starting the player in and having the menus or things be more interactable and you're immediately moving. So you right away get that feel of like, oh, this is what it feels like to play. Like the menu is interactable for the gameplay. Things like that immediately bring the player in and go, oh, this is cool. Let's check out more. Because every option, if your menu is subpar, it's like, well, this doesn't look like they put in much effort. That's a good place for people to drop out. Like, so at that rate, don't have a menu, start them in the game. Like get the players to the goal as fast as possible. Same with, I see a lot of people that, you put a cutscene in your game jam game. That's really cool, but it's unskippable. It's timed. And it took me 2 minutes to get here because you put way more text in there than was needed. So it's things like that. Like all of those things, the longer it takes to get the player to playing are places where people are potentially going to close it.
It's also the amount of time it takes to make your start menu and your loading screen and your splash page. If there's things that aren't your game, just don't worry about making them, or make them at the very end if you're kind of bored and you've run out of time, which doesn't really happen. But you don't need a pretty menu, like you say. Just jump straight in. A couple of things that I would say that you really got to pay attention to is you need a way to quit the game without having to Control-Alt-Delete on your computer. I've played so many games, prototypes, demos, game jams where I was like, cool, that was kind of fun. Escape? No, that doesn't work. How the heck do I close this thing down? And you've been forced into full screen and there's no way to exit the thing. So for the love of God, escape key to get out of it or some way just to quit out of the game. That'd be one thing. And the other thing would be mix your audio, your volume, so it's like reasonable. If someone's got mid-level, they've got their headphones set to, or speakers set to medium, that your audio is, gentle. There's nothing worse than you play a game. Oh, it's cool. Play another game. That's cool. And then play a third game and your ears get exploded or your speakers just, are super, super loud. I think, just be mindful of audio.
That's another reason that I think browser games work really, really well too, because you have the browser audio control built in. And on top of that, you can always refresh to restart the game, or you can escape and full screen it as well.
I balance all audio. I basically permanently keep my headphones set to 50% volume, like my system volume set to 50%, and I balance everything around that. And it generally works out a lot better. Same for like making YouTube video, like all audience, I balance around having the system at 50%. That way people can make it louder or quieter. Just depending. But yeah, if you normally have your stuff set, really low and you start, turning all of your volumes up, it can be a problem. I have to make sure to, when opening new games on stream, I mute the system audio going into the stream to not blast people's eardrums.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're playing a multiplayer game with a friend. Like, hey, let's play this game. It's going to be great. Okay, you fire it up. I'll fire it up. We haven't played it before. You got your headphones on. You're trying to talk to them. And all of a sudden, there's a 5-minute, introductory movie where it's so loud. And you're like, where are the controls? I can't hear them. Yeah, just loud.
Before we move on too far, I saw a good message in chat, which I 100% agree with, is anytime you write text that a player should read, cut it in half. And I'm not even cut it in thirds. Like, seriously, never more than 10 words on the page that the player has to read, and don't make it go through 10 different pages of that. Players don't read. They're not gonna. I'm notoriously bad at that. Everybody, if you give me a story game, I'm skipping it. I'm mashing through it. I want to play the game. I mean, some people care about the story, but allow people to skip it. That's kind of a big one. People will write these like long bricks of text in a font that's really hard to read, that's scaled up, and you run into these issues of just like, it's just too much. That's another thing that I just take from marketing and advertising is try not to put more than 10 words in a message at max, and try to make everything as concise as possible, because that's a big one.
I think that's a good lesson for game design in general is if you're writing something that someone doesn't yet care about, then they're not going to be interested in it. So if they start the game, it's like, many years ago, there was a princess who, was bitten by a dragon. I don't know the princess. I don't know the dragon. I don't know this game. Like, let me get in there and, jump over a few things, win, lose, die, triumph. Then I'm going to start to care about what's trying to stop me from getting to my goal. Then you can tell me, the dragon's trying to stop you. And if only you use the, XYX combination, you can defeat the dragon's minions. Then I'm starting to, it's connected. I have a reason to care about the story. But introductory story, I don't care about that yet, because I don't know what's going on.
To piggyback on that with text, actually, I see this a lot where people will write more like lore fluff type text, but they'll embed important information about the game within that to make it more thematic. Now, if you can do that, that's fine. Make it a different color. Make the mechanical parts of any text, like if you have any kind of fluff text, make any mechanical part a different color, or anything you need to know to play the game a different color, so you can easily scan and go, oh, break the wall. Got it, right? You didn't have to read about the story of how you found the magic thing that can break the wall. It's like, oh, I need to break a wall. That is a massive shorthand that will just save so much confusion in players. And it allows you to still do the fluff, tell your story if you would like, but it doesn't limit people that don't care as much about the story, and doesn't make them searching through cutscenes or dialogue options that they may not even have access to again.
On that too, like I bid a lot of strategy games. I've made card games. I've made, tactics games. And I find that like for abilities and like card text and stuff like that, I'm removing a bunch of unnecessary words too. Like I remove if and when, or like I literally have on trigger, like ability, like doesn't when this card performs an attack. It's like on attack, do the thing, right? Like remove as many words as possible to get it to, it's so much easily understandable then in the context of the game if you just remove all the unnecessary words.
And to bounce with that, like I'm a big card game nerd, big Magic the Gathering player, and all sorts of card games back in the day. Use consistent verbiage, keywords. Don't call something a slash here and a strike here.
Yeah.
When you're getting into mechanical terms about the mechanics of the game and like the actual things that people need to do, don't be wishy-washy with the words. Coin or make a keyword for the different things that the player needs to do and always call it by that.
Yeah.
It eliminates a lot of confusion because no one's going to think, then you don't have to deal with that issue of like, is this a slash or is it a strike? Is it a, this or a that? That can definitely help clean up a lot of things in almost any game.
We're getting deep into the weeds of like game design
sorry.
stuff now. No, but dude, I could nerd out on this stuff because I just went through this with Murder Bunnies, like making it all consistent, man. It's way more complicated than it sounds.
I do still find this to be relevant though for game jams, because one of the biggest things that I do run into with game jams is, what do I do? Like, you've made a game, and it could very well be a really cool game. I've played a lot of really cool games that, unless I had because when I play game jam games, I usually do it on stream, so I have the designer in the chat, and I can get the feedback of like, oh, you're doing it wrong. You need to do this and this. There's many games where it's just like, oh, if you weren't here, I would have never have had this cool experience and actually played and enjoyed this, because what I thought I had to do was nothing like what I actually needed to do.
Yeah.
So
clarity
is
unclear
a huge
sometimes.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that kind of disagreement in chat too, and people are like, oh, well, it's easy. You could have just done that. But like, for every person like me, there's 1,000 people that you didn't talk to that didn't understand that and just immediately bounced off. Right.
The other one to remember, to bring it back into game jams, is when you're making game jam games, you're not getting players of the genre that you make. Like, if you make a platformer game and put it on Steam, the people buying that game are going to have some sort of base knowledge in platformers. Most likely they'll have some built-in heuristics, some built-in muscle memory, and just the general understanding of how a platformer works. In a game jam, you get people from every aspect. You may make a platformer for a game jam, and someone who's only ever played, puzzle games or, point and click adventures is going to try to play your game. So toning down that difficulty and really understanding that you're going to get people from all walks, and making sure that you don't need some sort of previous knowledge. I mean, that's the same. People generally talk about how Portal's a great intro game. It's like, it's actually not if somebody doesn't play video games, because you have to understand how to move around in a 3D space. If you already know how to move around in 3D space, it's great to learn puzzle games. But, we forget about, as designers, especially, or people that have just played games for years, we forget about the fact that a lot of people that are new don't have this like built-in knowledge of just the commonalities between games and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's especially true with genre knowledge, like you said. It's funny because I've had Alyssa playtest my game Battle Barn, and it's a tactics game. It's a grid-based tactics game, and she was very adamant that like I needed a tutorial describing the end turn button, and I'm like, it's an end. What do you mean? It's an end turn? Like, you just end your turn. That's how it works. And she's like, no, I didn't know that. I just sat there. She's like, nothing's happening in the game. It never even occurred to me. I was just like, I played so many tactics game and turn-based games where it's just like end turn, but okay, describe that it works in turns and that you have to end your turn and all this stuff. So yeah, it's important for sure. Do we have any questions in the chat that I've seen a bunch of people talk about stuff.
What are your thoughts on art assets? So, there's a lot of people who are into game development, gameplay developers. They love making the mechanics, doing some programming. They're not artists. And one of the things we preach here is use asset packs. They're amazing. Just go use asset packs. But game jams, there's different rules because you need to be able to share your project. You need to be able to distribute your project so that people can access those assets. So then there's some licensing issues. What would you say for the person out there who's like, oh, I'm not really very good at art. I don't really want to do a game jam because it's not going to look good. What advice would you have for those folks?
So asset packs, number one, again, read your jams rulebooks. There's really only a handful of jams I've ever really seen that don't allow you to do that. Most of the time it's use an asset use an asset you have a legal right to use and make sure you credit. The only ones I really know of is like Ludum Dare, but only in Ludum Dare if you're doing compo does that matter, because in compo you have to do everything yourself. If you're doing the normal jam, you can use assets all you want as long as you credit. It's very few jams that I've ever seen where you can't use art assets, so use them. I mean, let's say if you don't do art, team up with an artist, use pre-made assets because, I mean, if your goal is to just make the gameplay, focus on the gameplay. Don't spend your time trying to make art. That's not what you want to do. It's the same reason why I try and avoid making sound effects and music. It's not a thing I enjoy doing. It's not what I'm good at. I'll, use somebody who knows what they're doing there and make sure to credit them for it. The other one is if you really don't want to do any of that, but you want to have everything be your stuff, use simple shapes. Look at something like Thomas Was Alone. You've got amazing, if you can use lighting, you can get amazing feeling out of shapes. But the one thing to do when you're doing shapes, especially if you're not an artist, go find a color palette. Go to something like lowspec.com, pick a color palette that's got like 8 or so colors that are basically designed to work together, and use that. That can make even the most like janky looking project. Because I've seen a lot of people, they'll finish a game jam with with programmer art in it, right? We all make programmer art while we're working because there's no point in finalizing the art if you don't know if it's going to stick. Right. So, I mean, my cameras are all a pink box with a little, old school camera drawn onto it, like hand with the mouse. But I turn it off when I play the game, but I turn it off in the game. Or, if you have characters that are all programmer art, but you don't have time for that, switch them to triangles, circles, squares, rhombuses, whatever you want to go with, and just apply a nice color. Play more with effects and, get particles in there, get some lighting effects in there. You can do a lot without needing actual art. But if your colors clash, it's never going to be saved. So my number one thing is always just learn to use a color palette. I went to art school. I've done color theory, done all this. Still terrible at putting together color palettes. So I still go to lowspec.com and just use a pre-made one that someone has put together of like, I like the way these colors complement each other, and then stick to it.
It's an easy way to kind of get something that looks good without much effort. Alternatively, I've also just stolen screenshots of games and just color picked all their colors from a screenshot because they know something I don't. I don't know how they make it look good, but if I steal their colors, then it looks better on my thing.
Tim, some questions about the theme, when we're going to announce the theme, and just how Draggy Dog the theme is going to be.
Not very Draggy Dog.
I've been lobbying for, hey Tim, let's have a theme which is all about animals that scooch. But,
do you want to tell Vimlark about Draggy Dog? Is that what you want to do?
Dude,
right?
I don't want to give away my idea. What if he steals it? So, well,
I've got my notepad already.
For months on our live casts, this is all the community. It's not me. This was absolutely zero. I didn't come up with it and then pitch it and then go on about it every week.
Their fault.
So yeah, it's the entire premise of the game is you play as a dog dragging itself around on its butt, because when dogs have got worms, or actually it's to do with something with their butt gland being inflamed. But anyway, they drag themselves around. So funny. You see an image of that, you're like, that's hilarious. So that's the entire game. There's no actual gameplay discussed. Like we don't know what's going to happen with it. Why are you doing that? But anyway,
this is a puzzle game where you're trying to fill out the squares. You realize this, right? Like it would be amazing.
We've gone through
I've already stolen the idea. Sorry, it's mine now.
We've gone through various degrees of grossness in terms of what trail you leave behind you. I don't think it's about the trail. I don't think you're trying to vandalize anything with your dog. I think you're just trying to express your creativity and just be cool. But yeah, well, that's it really. That's Draggy Dog. and so we've talked about it a bunch and said, well, let's have a Draggy Dog game jam where everyone makes a Draggy Dog game. But Tim's against it because Tim's such a killjoy. He's like, that would be stupid, Rick. I don't want
everybody to make the same game.
That's one of the hard things with picking a theme for a game jam, I will say, is somewhat because like mine, I always do a restriction and a theme. I've done so many game jams at this point, just a theme and a time limit's become boring to me. Yeah. So I like to, like on my jam, I add in some sort of extra restriction as well that you kind of got to like theme. And so there's like 2 things you got to add in. But when you're coming up with a theme, one of the things you really have to consider is everybody going to get the same game out of this? Because that's not very fun. Yeah. Like you want something that's open enough that people can take it in a lot of different directions, but also, common enough that nobody's just like, I have no idea. That's too existential. I have no concept of it. Themes are a definite challenge.
Do you need to have a theme in a game jam, you think? Can you just say, look, you've got a weekend, just make a thing and make it cool? And the reason I ask that question is I think a lot of people have a bit of an idea in their head, and the theme is, magical sparkles. And you're like, I'm just going to go make my platformer and then put a couple of sparkles in it. Do you think, I often wonder if the theme helps people narrow the framework and focus in, oh, okay, we don't have infinite possibilities, we can do this, or if it actually makes it more difficult because you say, how the heck do I do a thing which is, the theme is space? I'm like, how do I do that? I don't, what do you think about themes in general?
Yes, is basic. It's both. Like I've gone into both. I've legitimately dropped game jams I planned on doing because I didn't like the theme. Like literally, I had one that was starting. It was the theme was announced. I think it was spooky, and it was November, so we had just finished Halloween, and I was like, it's November 15th, and the theme is spooky. No, I like literally just dropped it because like I have no interest in doing this, and I've done that with a lot of jams.
Yeah.
There's other jams I've done because I heard the theme and thought it was more interesting and had a really good idea for it. I'd say the idea of the theme, the reason I like them, and I like them with an added restriction because a theme alone is a little too vague in my opinion.
What's an example of a restriction that you've seen or used?
So like I used boss in my last jam. You had to have a boss in your game in some capacity. And then I gave you a theme. I don't even remember what the theme was of my own jams at this point. But basically I give, so like I've participated in like the platformer jam, the bullet hell jam, there's the ones that add in an extra thing. Cause I find generally games get more interesting and you come up with more interesting and better ideas when you're trying to work with restrictions and try to pair things up.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about poets and artists do that all the time, right? I can only make something with these colors. I can only write with these words. There are entire books out there written without using the letter E. Did you know that? Like people have literally written novels that don't use the letter E. So, and it's a creative challenge, right? So when you're going into a jam, a lot of the times, at least for me, the thing I like is this creative challenge of how can I come up with something that I want to make that also fits this theme, which is why I like playing a lot of jams and having a lot of kind of ideas on deck where it's like, okay, here's the theme. All right, well, what have I done in the past that I kind of want to work on again? Okay, there's this. How do I then transform this thing into fit with this theme? And you get some really interesting ideas out of it.
Some of my best games came from themes that I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to make that work. Like, that's just like two incompatible genres was a Ludum Dare like a couple of years ago. And I was just like, that is the stupidest theme ever. Like, they're incompatible. Why would you smash them together? But you know what? I made some cool games and I played some really cool games out of that jam too, because it really made people kind of think outside of the box. And I think like themes, I like themes personally. I'd never thought about restrictions. That's a fantastic idea. I would totally join a jam with a restriction. But I like themes because it takes the infinity of ideas and kind of shortens it. And I think especially when you're new, like you've got all these ideas that it's crazy. But I've always added my own modifiers. So like I've went through game jams where they had a theme, but I always go like, okay, this time I want to focus on a story. This time I want to focus on art. This time I want to focus on. So I've had games that focus on different things. And then after you do enough too, like I start to say, oh, you know what? I want to make this kind of game. So like whatever the theme is, I'm going to figure out how to make that kind of game with the theme just because I want to make that kind of game. So you can do your own thing with the theme a little bit too. Like it's a lot more open and free. You can also ignore it in most jams too. Like you're not going to rate highly on the theme, but like, you know what? Just it's usually that important.
Yeah, just in general, like if you are into design, adding constraints will 9 times, probably like 7 out of 10 times is going to make it better. Sometimes, you're going to make something like when you're working with constraints, like sometimes it just doesn't come through. But more often than not, you're going to come up with something that you would have never thought of before. Like I'm definitely that type of person. You give me a blank sheet of paper and a pencil and say, all right, are we back in an hour? You're going to come back in an hour and I'm going to have nothing on that paper because I've got to figure out what I want to make, which means I have to eliminate all the things I don't. And that's everything. So, but you come in and say, okay, I need you to draw X and Y, and it's got to be doing something. It's like, okay, well, now I have a direction I can start going in. I still have a ton of leeway. You tell me I need to draw a dog. Cool. You didn't tell me what type of dog. You didn't tell me what they're doing. You didn't tell me anything. I mean, they could be dragging.
I told you they
their
were
butt or not.
dragging though, Vimlark.
Yeah,
that was very
exactly,
clear.
right?
It's
See, we bring this back around. But yeah,
thanks-
like you.
thanks.
But that's the problem with the draggy dog theme is you're saying what it is and what it's doing.
See, I will give you
Therefore-
that one. You're being a lot more specific about what the dog is doing. I
Yeah.
honestly say like kitschy themes like that are fun, and more restricted ones. I actually have a game jam like idea that I want to do that I don't want to really fully call a game jam, but I want to do more of a community project, which is I want to write a 1-page game design doc and give that to 10 different people and
Yeah.
see
That'd
how
be a
they
really good
interpret it,
video.
right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
interesting.
I think those would be a really cool idea. But when you're bringing in, like, the more people you bring in, the less restrictive you need to be, because it just becomes like, it's just, you can't do that. It gets less enjoyable. Like, playing 5 people's games that, have done the same thing. Like, it's a really neat idea. But I think with a game jam, you don't want to be that limiting, because most people are coming in, it's like, this is my weekend. I want to have some fun this weekend. Oh, I don't want to make that. Like, if I have to make another, like, I will not join another jam where the theme is like joined together, 2 of a kind, a pair. Like, I'm done with that thing of like 2 things connected. I've done it 10 times at this point. And
there goes that idea.
I mean, the thing is, it's a good theme, and the problem is because it's a good theme, it's been done to death. It's the same as like there's only one. There's a bunch of themes out there that they're really good ideas if you've never done a jam before. So people do still get excited. So I try not to bash any theme, but if you do
this is the balance as well. It's the balance, because you've got people who have never gone in a game jam and maybe only been learning game development for a month, and then you've got people who've been doing it for years, and this is their 20th game jam, and they're like, as with what you're saying, I don't want to do that same sort of thing again. So finding a theme that's right in the sweet spot is tricky. And I think it's also a question of, is the theme thematic? And what I mean by that, is it like, spooky? Spooky for me is more, when I hear that, I'm thinking ghosts and I'm thinking dark.
Yeah.
It's more the visuals and the aesthetics, whereas something else like join 2 together feels more like a mechanic. So have you seen any that kind of represent?
That's the restriction. Usually the restriction is the mechanical part and the theme is the concept part. So I just pulled it up because I couldn't remember. Like my first jam, right? The restriction was collectibles. So you had to have a collectible in your game in some way. That's a mechanic that most people can understand, and it can be used in many different ways. Like, what is collecting, right? Okay, you can collect coins, you can collect cards, you can collect team members, all this stuff. And then the theme was there and back. So kind of an open idea. I prefer, like, for the theme part, to fall into like the idiom category of just kind of like these open-ended statements or sentences that can kind of just guide you on a path,
or like
as
random stuff,
especially if it doesn't conclude. If it opens like the door to something, but then doesn't and then doesn't have an ending, it's like, oh, okay, so now I can go all over the place. What was I remember the Brackies one that just happened I thought was really wide and open, but still really difficult to come up with. It is not real. What is not real? Who is not, like, and honestly, loved that theme. Was probably one of the hardest themes that I had to figure out, because like I was just like, God, that's so open. What do I do with it? And the games that came out of it were really cool. Like, I ended up making a game where you're a kid playing The Floor is Lava. So it's a top-down platformer where you're jumping around the furniture. But if you fall on the ground, it just goes away and you've actually lost time. You got to go back to the next place you can climb back up, because the lava's not real. Like, I would have never thought of making a game like that if it wasn't for a theme that was just kind of like, I spent a good day of that jam just trying to come up with an idea.
Yeah. Questions in the chat as well at the moment about the length of our particular game jam that's coming up. Maybe Tim, in a moment, you can tell some details about it. But we've chosen 10 days so that it has 2 weekends, because we expect
10 day.
A lot of people are working, so they just can't work on it during the week. But then you've at least got 2 weekends, and maybe you've only got half a day on the first weekend and half a day on the second weekend. That's totally fine. So the spirit here is not that you spend 10 days of 18-hour days working on your game. That's absolutely not what anyone would expect. So you don't need to do that. But hopefully within that 10-day window, you get a day or 2 that you can work on it, and that's different to For me, I don't like the 48-hour jams, because I don't like not sleeping. I don't like saying, oh, I've got to go, rush. And it just, for me, I need to sleep. So the whole, I'm up at 5 in the morning and I'm trying to talk to my teammate and there's a bug and we're just making more bugs and it's broken. And, for me, I'm too old for that stuff. So I think that's what we're trying to do with this game jam is just respect the fact that our community needs to sleep and that you guys have jobs.
Oh, yeah. I'm right there with my jams are 10 days. The first one was a week. And then the group that I run my jams with, they're like, we found 10 days works better because the problem is if like we found a week to be problematic where it starts on a Friday, everyone's jazzed. Okay, the jam starts. All right, you work all Friday night, you work Saturday, you work Sunday. You're like, I've got all the stuff. I'm going to finish all this during the week. And then the week happens and hits you like a ton of bricks. And now it's next Friday. And you're like, I didn't get anything done.
Yeah.
So having
ending
those
on a Friday
weekends,
is weird. Yeah.
Having those 2 weekends, I find like starting on a Friday, ending on a Monday, I think is like the perfect time frame for me, especially. I'm in the weird, but like I don't like 48-hour game jams. I do a lot of them because most of the big ones are that there's a lot of people out there that's all they think of game jam is it's 48 hours because it's the most common one. Like I participate in them because, you know, for content and stuff, I got to do the big ones and that's generally what they are. But I prefer either something to happen all in one day. So give me, 12, like there's a like Try Jam is 3 hours, which is a lot of fun. If you've never tried that, it lets you plan out ahead of time and it's just 3 hours of working time. It's a really fun little exercise. 12-hour jams are pretty fun, or 24 I find are all good for me because I can just kind of focus for a day and grind and enjoy.
Yeah.
When it splits into that next day, I start feel like I'm sacrificing stuff. But if it's like a week, it's really nice because it's like, okay, well now I can spend, 6 hours on a Saturday, 5 hours on a Sunday, and then 3 hours after work, before I go to bed kind of thing, and make a lot of progress. And I find that to be better. Like I made the decision during the last Udumdari, I didn't like the game I was making. And at 11 o'clock, because I do compo, so I have 48 hours at 11 p.m. on the first day, I was just like, I don't like what I've done. I was planning to start over and be up all night. And I made the first grown-up decision I've probably made in the last couple of years doing game jams. Just like, I just need to drop because I'm going to be incredibly unhealthy here. I'm planning to stay up all night and grind this out in the next like 17 hours. And that's not going to be good for me. I've as someone who, because I think I did the math somewhere around in the last 3 years, I've participated in at least 40 game jams. And burnout's real. It's rough. I was having to do it for content for the last 2 years to be able to post on YouTube and all of that kind of stuff, because those were the videos that were getting views. And it's just like doing them back to back to back, and sacrificing sleep to be able to grind it out. Yeah, I can do it. It's not enjoyable. And the worst part is by the time you finish, when you're ground out like that, it's just like, I don't enjoy what I just did. Like, like half the time I'd finish, like, I don't even like my game. I just spent the last 12 hours on this straight and I don't like it.
It just feels empty. Like,
it really ruins the experience.
Dude, I'm in the same way. I spend a lot of time doing that, no lifing 48-hour jams and going all that. And I have some of the most amazing things that I've created and I have magical memories of that time. But when I think about doing that now, I'm just like, no, thank you. I'm good. So like 10-day jam excited me because I'm like, yep, that's 2 weekends and like an hour or two a day during the week. It'll be great. It'll be fun, and we'll make something. We'll make the same scope of game I could make in a weekend, no lifing it, but it'll be much more thought out because I'll have a lot of downtime and plenty of sleep. And then for the people that don't have a ton of experience, they've got all the time to kind of look at stuff, research docs, watch tutorials, whatever they need to do to kind of make it happen, Cool. Is there any kind of, if anybody has any questions in the chat, feel free to pop them in. Vimlark's been here with us. He's happy to answer anything. Is there any kind of final parting, closing thoughts that you can think of that we maybe haven't covered as far as game jams go?
The biggest thing, keep your scope small. Plan for half the time. If you can try to plan a game that you think you can make in half the time of your jam, that's going to help your scope a lot more and make you feel a lot. I mean, it'll also help with that stress at the end of the jam, right? Like if you've mostly finished the game, you're trying to add in a couple things. Oh, I couldn't get those last couple of things in. Well, the game for the most part is fun and playable. So I can just cut that stuff out. It didn't work in. Cool. Right. We've got something playable. Getting something playable that's fun and enjoyable as fast as possible is kind of the main goal before you start adding in extra stuff like extra content, power-ups, these kinds of things. Avoid making games that require power-ups for game jams, honestly. And the reason I say that is because once you start introducing power-ups and new abilities and this kind of thing, it's hard to just implement one. Most of the time when people have that, you want more. So you've just now opened the scope of just like, oh, now I need to do like 5. I don't have time to add and test 5 of them.
Yeah.
And the one piece of advice that I don't think I got to earlier that I don't think I said, with timing, right? You want your games to be about 10 minutes, ideally. When you're making your game, the biggest piece of thing that I've kind of come up with is play through your game. Like when you get like a good finished kind of like, or semi-finished product, play through your game with all the knowledge, you don't need to speed run it, but just like play through efficiently. Like how fast can you get from start to the end of your game with knowing everything that's in it? Take that time and multiply it by 3. And that's roughly about the time the first time player is going to take to get through it. Mm-hmm. So if your game jam game, if you get through it, if it takes you 15 minutes to go through your game jam game, any player is going to take at least a half an hour or more. Like I shoot to be done. I shoot to be able to play my games. Granted, I do make a little bit more action heavy games. I'm much more into those kind of games, but in general, multiplying your play time by 3 kind of gives you a better thing. So if I try to get my games to be able to play through by me done in 3 to 4 minutes. That way the gameplay is anywhere between like 9 to 12. So somewhere in there kind of hits you that sweet spot. Because we forget how much better we are at our own game. So if it takes us 10 minutes to get through, that's going to be too long. Like you don't want to shoot for a playtime of 10 minutes for you. You want to shoot for a playtime you want to shoot for way less than that for you because you know the game. Anybody that's coming in and playing for the first time is going to have no clue and take significantly longer.
And if you got 10 days, you've got time for this jam specifically to have other people test it and give you feedback to make sure.
If you can play test during the jam, that is so valuable. I can't tell you like how many times I have actually had game jam games saved because I'm like just shot it over to a buddy and be like, look, I took the time to make it, but will you please just play this and tell me what you think? And he's just like, everything's good except this is kind of a problem. It's like, oh, I wouldn't have even thought of that. The game would have been out and people would have been having these issues. So you can catch stuff a lot earlier, getting people that are unfamiliar, specifically get people that are unfamiliar with the project to try it out because they're going to give you the most clear feedback on whether something makes sense or not.
Which is exactly why we do game jams, because that's what you do if you're making a commercial game you're going to launch. You need to make it, you need to get player feedback. And after you've been working on your game for a while, you don't even realize. It's amazing when someone plays your game and you're like, how do you not see the door? Like the door's right there. You're like, this game sucks. I don't see the door. I know where the door is, but you completely lose sight of the fact that you initially designed the door to be a bit hidden, but that was, I don't know, 4 months ago. So that you did that. And I think game jams give you a little taste of that. So it's practice, and learning all these lessons by doing a game jam.
It had a question from Jobo. It said, when you're doing a game jam, how do you know if your skills are up to fulfilling the role you are on the team? Like, how do you know your skills are up to snuff, basically?
I mean, the problem is nobody knows their skills are up to snuff until they've done it a bunch of times. Like, get in and do your best. I mean, the whole point of a game jam generally, if you're new and you're worried about that kind of thing, make sure you're joining up with a team that you at least kind of have some knowledge of. That's definitely one thing. It's just the general interpersonal skills part, but also, don't go for a jam that's crazy competitive. Right. There are plenty of jams out there that don't even have ratings. It's just making something. And again, same thing with what I was saying before, just make a game along the side of it and see if you enjoy the process. And if you can make it, like, there are lots of ways to test it and try it out before you fully commit if you don't want to fully commit. But ultimately, the only way to do it the only way to know is to do it, and the only way to get better is to do it. So get through. It's the same reason why I tell people, like, if you're starting out and you've been working on, like, I always tell people don't start on your dream game right away because you're going to rewrite it and learn too much and all that. But game jams are really good because they give you the full process of concepting, creating, exporting, posting, and then having people play. The number of people I know that, like, it's like, oh, well, it works in the engine. It's like, yeah, but the export doesn't, and that's all that matters, right? If it works in the engine, nobody can play it in your engine. So going through those processes of just doing it, even if it fails, I've had plenty of jams that just failed miserably on me. I've got a couple of games that I don't even show on my itch page because they're just that I don't think that they're good enough. And that's fine. You can take stuff down. You don't need to leave stuff up. You can participate and be like, I didn't like that, and just take it off, or leave it up and say, like, this is how far I've come. The whole point of the jam generally is to just do things and get better. So really biting that bullet. It's like, here's the thing. If your game's not great, you get some feedback telling you your game wasn't great, and generally what you can do better next time. take that, take it to heart, learn from it. That's valuable information that you may not have gotten otherwise.
Take the pressure off it. Absolutely. Like, this is not some crazy end all be all. This is not the ultimate thing you're ever going to do as an artist. This is like a thing you're going to do in a week with a bunch of cool people from the internet. So yeah.
Also remember, even if you do take the Game Jam, because lots of Game Jam games then become full releases, you're not going to take the Game Jam game you made and post that to Steam. You're going to remake it. You always will. So you don't need to make like the perfect code so that you can then keep working on the game after.
Yeah, over optimizing. That's a huge deal. Actually.
Like just make a game that plays, and then from that you have a great working prototype. If you really like the idea and people did, and you want to advance that, that's great. You're going to rewrite it because there's no you don't want to build off of that same code. For sure. Yeah. So make sure, because especially you can start off trying to optimize as best as you want. In those last couple of hours, you're going to be making the juiciest spaghetti you can, right? Like all that code is going to be intermingled and interweaved, and nothing will work if you change one comment, which makes no sense, but it happens.
My games are super glue and duct tape. That's I don't even know how they work, but you know what, they did. So it's fine. Cool. Any other final questions from anybody? I don't really see. I think we covered a lot of stuff. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, dude, and covering everything that we covered.
Are you gonna come along and be part of our game jam? Have we invited you to do that? Do you have time? Are you busy? I know it's one of those things. It's like, hey, do you want to go on a date? It's like, oh, I'm washing my hair that day. So
I was invited. My problem is I've actually restricted myself to not doing another game jam. Like I did too many. And so basically quick rundown, like at the start of the pandemic, I was furloughed from my job. So I started doing YouTube and Twitch and all that stuff kind of full time. So I was doing game jam after game jam after game jam for the last couple of years. I recently went back to my job after 2 years in March. So I'm now working a full-time job as well as trying to keep up with streaming on the weekends, producing YouTube content, all of this. And I'm fried. So I've basically told myself, like, I've restricted myself. I have one more game jam to do this year, which is the Game Maker's Toolkit one, mostly because it's kind of one of the biggest ones of the year, and I was lucky enough to win in 2020. And I was in like the top like 150, 130 or something like that last time. So that's kind of like one of the big ones for YouTube content. But other than that, I'm like, I've got a long running project that I haven't touched in 2 years. And I've also trying to figure out my just life in general in terms of schedule and sleep.
I feel you, man.
I will be happy. I look forward to seeing the games people make out of it and all that. But yeah, unfortunately right now I'm just like I had like, that's literally why I dropped the last one, like even Ludum Dare, which is like one of the big ones. It's just like, I need to take care of myself here and my anxiety. I have massive anxiety stuff. So like, I'm at this point, like I need to stop.
Good, dude. It's good that you recognize that. I had to take, I think I've been off of YouTube 6-9 months now, at least, if not more. And it's one of the best things I ever did. I'm going to get back to it eventually, but chilling out and like coming back to yourself and just like, you know, existing in a happy state that doesn't constantly require the hamster wheel of work.
I'm trying to find that. I'm working 7 days a week right now. So yeah, dude, like, and I have been for the last 8 weeks.
And that's just unsustainable long term, right? So you gotta,
I feel it at some point.
I hope you do. It's, dude, and if you ever need a chat, I'm around too. Like, I know that stuff's rough, man. I talk about it all the time on YouTube. Well, I did a year ago.
Yeah, I look at it this way. I was lucky enough to be able to support myself for like 2 years. I mean, not to like an extravagant style or anything like that. Like, it's definitely was better for me to go back to my job and everything. But I was able to hit a point and do something that most people dream of, right? Like, it's like, I'm so grateful and amazed that people actually care about the things that I do and watch. So I don't want to abandon all of that. I want to keep doing fun stuff. I'm just trying to figure out that new balance, which you know, just how it runs, right? It's always going to take a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for coming out. If people wanted to find you on the internet, where could they do that? I'm gonna post a link to your YouTube.
I'm Vimlark pretty much everywhere. So on Twitch, I'm Twitch Vimlark, YouTube Vimlark, Twitter Vimlark. That's pretty much all I use. I don't really use much other social media at this point. But yeah, I stream So I try to get videos up as often as I can. If you're interested in game jams, at the very least, I put up a video at the start of each month, kind of like highlighting upcoming game jams. Weirdly enough, you guys want to hear a weird story? I was legitimately editing that video, and I was working on the GameDev.tv segment of the video because it was in the last one. I was on the website looking at your guys' website, and Tim messaged me asking me to be on this. I was just like, the coincidence here is creepy. So like literally while editing,
Tim just has hacking software. He was looking through your webcam.
I told you, take that stuff off. Yeah, no, other than that, I post videos on YouTube. We've got tons of different content there. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. On Saturdays, I play community games. So we do a big raffle system. If you're in the stream and you submitted a game, we do a raffle. Whoever wins, we play their game and basically do a critique. I mostly approach it from a user experience standpoint, and we kind of go through what it's like for someone to play your game and how to make it, easier to understand and more enjoyable, because watching somebody play your game with a face cam is super valuable. A face will tell you more than any words. So I try to give back where I can. I don't have a lot of time to play people's games, so I've just basically made that's what I do every Saturday is we just go through and play people's games. Even if your game isn't played or you don't even have a game, we just have long design discussions about game design concepts and all of that. It's an absolute blast. It's probably one of my favorite things I get to do.
Cool. That's good to know.
But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for your time today. Really cool hanging out with you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have fun. Go to Vimlark's channel, click the stuff, subscribe, do all that stuff, and then join the Game Jam too. We'll see you guys all next week.
Thank you all for the follows. I can see them coming through.
Boom.